I don't want to waste any time. I actually want to hand it over to the experts that are here in the room who are going to share, I know, what will be really valuable insights and stories from the work that they have done and they are doing. I'm also very keen to hear about why some people are here in the room. Actually, let's just start with that for just a minute. I'd love to hear anybody who's willing to volunteer, a couple of people. What brought you here? Why are you here in this room? April.
Hi, I'm April Mero. I'm a postdoc researcher in biomedical informatics, and I just found out about this event over the weekend. It was full, and then I checked again on Sunday, and it was available. And I was really excited about it because my NIH K99 research proposal is on this very topic. It's on inclusive patient platform technologies for Hispanic patients with multiple sclerosis. So I'm excited to be here and learn more.
Okay, that is a tall order. Who else? What brought you into, besides the food and drink and the view, which is a good reason for all of us to be here for sure. Why are you here?
So my name is Kenya. I'm an alumni from UC San Diego. I'm here with my colleague. We both work at AT&T in Los Angeles. So we're both researchers. We're working on a study. We've interviewed people who have diverse disabilities. So we're trying to uncover what are the moments that we are including and excluding our customers in our products and services. So it's good to be back.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
Welcome back to campus. I'd like to hear from one more person. Yes.
My name is Gina Hooker. I'm a senior project manager at Sage Software, and we just, within the last year, rolled out a diversity and inclusion program, of which I am thrilled, really, really thrilled. It's kind of my passion, so I'm becoming more and more involved in that.
Great.
And I'm just coming here to learn to see how I can, what else I can bring back with me.
Great. So just by a show of hands, please raise your hand if you are currently a student. Raise them high. And if you're a professional. And if you're both. Lifelong learners? Okay. Great. So that's great. So this is going to be a really fun opportunity to do a lot of interactive discussions so that we can learn from each other, because we've got about a 50-50 representation in the room. 50% of us are in industry, 50% of us are in the classroom right now. We've got a couple that are crossing over on a regular basis, so let's really use that opportunity to be able to ask questions and figure out what it is that we came here to learn. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and let the three very wonderful experts who are here introduce themselves. I know that they have some slides, they've brought some stories. I think we're going to start with Stacy, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they can do it way better than I am. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right.
Stacy.
Hi everyone, I'm Stacy Pennington. Oh, there's a mic. Stacy Pennington. I'm an urban planner actually, so I think I'll bring a slightly unique point of view that hopefully will apply to everyone thinking about this topic from different perspectives, and happy to be here today. Thanks.
Hi everyone, Diane Forbes-Berthoud. I represent UC San Diego. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Diversity on campus, and I'm overseeing the strategic plan for diversity for UC San Diego. And my background is in organizational communication and social psychology and implementing large systems changes. My academic background is as a communication organizational faculty at Trinity University, Howard University, and George Mason University in Virginia.
Hi, my name is Carrie Sawyer. I'm a manager of inclusion and diversity here in San Diego at Qualcomm. So that means that my job is two things. First, working on representation, making sure that we're bringing in all kinds of people, especially underrepresented groups, women, people of color. And then my other side of the job is around inclusion. So that's really all about how you feel when you come to work and how you see yourself represented in the company and what that experience is like, so you can show up, bring your full self, and do your best work. So those just super uncomplicated things that we have to figure out. So excited to be here, and hope that everyone has lots of questions so we can have a really rich discussion with all this diversity on the panel.
So Stacy, do you want to start with?
Sure. I forgot to introduce my background. So I studied English at UCLA as an undergrad. Thought I was just going to transition to being a professional student and get my master's and PhD in literature, and then was swept away by the chance actually to work with my father's real estate development firm in San Diego, Langford & Associates. So some of the commentary is a reflection on that experience. And it became a platform for me to want to pursue something I became very passionate about, which I didn't know what it was at the time, but one of my mentors, who I'm blessed to have many of, said, you want to be an urban planner. So then I went to Harvard's Graduate School of Design and got my master's in urban planning. Then I was a Frederick Sheldon traveling fellow, which led me to research that justified creating my own company. And so I've been running SLP urban planning since 2006. So I thought I'd just start with a reminder of why we're here today. Traditionally, a veil of simplification, structured urban interventions, and now there's a heightened level of thoughtfulness about diversity and inclusion. Oh, thanks. I guess I do want this. And let me tell you a little bit more about what I mean about that. I do present often. One minute think that from how I'm acting up here. In the past, there's been a very top-down approach taken to real estate development and architecture and urban planning altogether. I'm sure many of us have lived in environments where you kind of feel that lack of connection to the end user, and it's blatantly clear. It affects how we've approached public housing projects in the past. So this is Mero, Amsterdam, where when you get down to the systems involved in developing these housing structures, it was so systemized that there was no place for the individual, the family, or the community to truly connect. It affects our approach to civic and public places. So this is the Boston City Hall, which is notorious for its lack of relevance and connection at the ground floor, and just the brutalist feeling that it exudes. And this isn't an architectural critique as much as a reflection on the pattern of lack of awareness of the end user through the urban planning, real estate development, and architectural process that just often happened in the past. And another project is the Embarcadero Center project, and this is just an example in San Francisco of a private-driven development, very ROI focused. That again, it's there and it's adapted well to the built environment and communities, but it didn't feature an importance of design thinking and human-centered design at the beginning. So what my work has ended up leading me to become aware of the fact I'm involved in, which is kind of funny how that ended up, is really about democratizing design through the lens of urban planning, placemaking, and community building. And pivots on the fact that there are varying ways to gather input, engage community, and democratize design. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples. One is a project some of you may have heard about. It's about the 6-block area within Upper East Village in downtown San Diego, shown with this red block. And early on, I started working on this in 2011, 2012. The mere location of this property really dictated a heightened importance of thinking beyond perimeters, beyond boundaries, and thinking differently about how a mixed-use development like this could come together, because it's the hinge between downtown San Diego and some really interesting and important urban neighborhoods immediately adjacent. Not to mention in the middle of pretty awesome freeway, open space, and transit infrastructure. So back then, what I'm going to touch on quickly now is a term called tactical urbanism. Has anyone here heard that term? Okay, so a few. So it's basically the use of short-term interventions to drive long-term change. And it's a platform through which you can engage the community and really collect real-time data and feedback that can help drive the future program of a neighborhood in a general way, not to mention the architecture, the parks and open spaces, the gathering spaces, and the community services. So back in 2011, 2012, when we started working in this area, this was the first diagram I did, which was just thinking through what types of cool different nodes and destinations could we create that would engage the community, that we could get then start to learn more about what they wanted. And looking back now, the entire effort in this neighborhood was quite a success. Before building or even starting to develop anything, we engaged over 125,000 people in a very diverse spectrum. So a little bit more specific. So One significant intervention that we did is up here was a vacant parking lot. And it seemed opportune to test the idea of a community garden. So in this urban environment in downtown San Diego, within a culture that doesn't necessarily affiliate and associate with dense urban living, the question that we were testing was, is there an interest in connecting with one another through the space of community garden? Is there an appetite for local schools to be able to collaborate with a nonprofit through which STEAM curriculum is taught through the lens of an urban garden? And so the answer was resoundingly yes. So it was so well received that when this lot became developed, which I'll show you in a little bit, we moved it just 3 blocks away to a larger site, which is a lease actually with the city of San Diego. So now that garden anchors the curriculum for 83 Civic High, which is just about 5 blocks down the road, a certain piece of the curriculum, as well as Urban Discovery Academy, which is like a block and a half. There's a little bit more details. Oh yeah, I dove deep on this one given the relevance. So incredibly diverse attendance as well. So the programs were geared towards engaging homeless children from Father Joe's, as well as the Prue School from up in La Jolla and everything in between. So there's the nature of tactical, right? It means that we move things, and we move some large things, including small sheds and garden boxes, which can be quite interesting and dramatic. So in that process, we also received a tremendous amount of engagement and feedback from large corporations, including these. The nonprofit community was a tremendous part of being able to bring all of this to life and to be able to connect with end users within the community. And the way we approached this was to set the stage with our own value system through our own initial events and programming, and then to open the gate and welcome anyone. And so everyone, for the most part, who walked through that gate to collaborate with us, aligned in the value system, which is incredibly important and has been a big part of the end result. At the heart and soul of all this, it turned out that the East Village community felt a strong disconnection from the arts community, and we learned that through many, many, many experiences, and so they became an anchor to the evolution of the area. And so altogether, I mentioned this number, and I'll just show you an example of how that translates into private development. So the feedback that we received in that effort not only generated the interest and the hype to be able to legitimize moving forward with the first downtown office building in over a decade, and it's net zero as well, because we got that input along the way about the importance of sustainability to our end users. But the architecture of this building is actually shaped through the synergy and kind of serendipity of what we noticed in terms of how people interact and connect with one another. We decided to do 2 externalized cores, and the elevator cores over here, connected by outdoor walkways. And then from the sustainability perspective, the personalized nature of spaces, it ends up being these movable sunshades, which day to day create a different exterior architecture and personality for the building depending on the user's needs at the time. So sounds like a nerdy thing, but I just find it incredibly fascinating and fulfilling that ended up being an end result of our work. I'm going to shift gears a little bit towards a little bit more of a neighborhood scale use of this type of toolkit. So Street Plans is a group that a guy, Mike Leiden, runs out of New York, and he published a book called Tactical Urbanism, which created a really handy and useful guide towards, for cities and neighborhoods of all scales to be able to solve problems in their neighborhood, small, medium, or large. In this case, what started out as a given need within a neighborhood to increase safety for children to be crossing the street and walking to school, the city hadn't given enough attention to that, giving crosswalk, and I'm giving this anecdote as a somewhat of a generic one that happens all over the country, all over the world. The community ended up taking matters in their own hand and going out there and painting a crosswalk. So that sounds like a relatively small gesture, but through that act of kind of bold kind of strength, really, many examples of how that use of tactile urbanism ended up changing policies, changing the quality of life in neighborhoods who previously had felt as though they hadn't had a voice. So it looks like a pretty mundane. In this case, they're actually implementing the longer-term crosswalk that had previously been tested. These are some photos, and these aren't workshops, just to be clear, that I've operated, but I work a lot with Mike Leiden and thought it was a great chance to plug his work as well. So in this case, in Long Beach, there was a community engagement to try to anticipate and engage members of the neighborhood and designing the future of their own neighborhood and their own gathering spaces. So think back to one of the earlier slides about how traditionally urban planners, urban designers, and architects and developers think top-down. It's really been an inverted model where cities that enjoy this type of dynamic are flourishing because they're connecting everyone in their community to an end result that leads to a quality of life, higher quality of life. I think within this entire construct, more than ever, instead of seeing economic development as a separate kind of tier and component of the work, it's completely interstitial to everything that's happening in the realm of urban planning and development. And I'm pleased to sit on the Economic Development Corporation's board of directors, where, and I'll speak about that in a second. Well, there you go. Their work this year under their wonderful chairwoman, Janice Brown's leadership, has kicked off with a focus on looking at the importance of inclusive innovation. I work in a lot of innovation districts, and there's a lot of talk about placemaking and talent attraction, talent retention, all this kind of stuff. But unfortunately, you kind of miss the boat. You completely miss the point of talking about all those things if you don't understand what the future of your workforce is. And so this was a great study. It's on EDC's website that just introduced to some very important regional corporate leaders on this board and beyond that, look guys, it's time, guys and gals, it's really time to start thinking about the importance of our future talent and the demographics of San Diego and the impact of that on urban planning and design of spaces is incredibly significant. This is an interesting, this is another mentor of mine, Marc Johnson with Civitas, was in charge of the Stapleton Airport redevelopment. So this was about a 20-25 year endeavor that he was involved from the very, very beginning. And I just want to use this slide to illustrate something that doesn't seem important, but it is. In this case, they use the parcelization map to ensure diversity of housing units. So all too often neighborhoods are comprised of repeated modules of the same parcel size, often similar housing designs. And the lack of diversity and texture not only is a character issue in my opinion, but it also is a fundamental challenge in terms of a broader objective of encouraging diverse incomes, diverse population, diverse residents, connected workforce. So in this case, the adjacency of dramatically different unit sizes, parcel sizes, and house designs was one way of embodying the importance of inclusion and diversity within the realm of urban planning. In this case, this is a West Tampa neighborhood park, and long story behind this, and it's another project for Marc Johnson with Civitas. Outreach cannot be overestimated in terms of its importance ever in urban planning, real estate development, architecture, and any initiative that means something. Taking the time to get to know the community that you're working in is just so incredibly important. You saw how we did it in Maker's Quarter, that's one approach. In this case, Marc was telling me a story about how he went around and met with every single resident within this neighborhood and had some maps and took some visits to the waterfront at the time, which was quite dilapidated. And this one man, about 80, 85 years old, pointed to under a bridge and said, "Did you know that we used to be able to boat from this point?" Well, until then, an interaction with the water and boating facilities had never even been contemplated. Like, it had been dead in the community as an idea for many, many generations and felt as though. So it became a very important piece of the plan, and now is a huge part of that entire community having access to the waterfront and rediscovering a vibrancy and enjoyment altogether. So I jumped across a lot of topics, but that is my comments in a nutshell, and I'm looking forward to engaging with everyone afterwards. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our great panel on diversity and inclusion. I'm going to set the video that I'm going to play up. It was part of a campus-wide campaign to hear from as many participants from campus about their ideas related to equity, diversity, and inclusion goals at UC San Diego. So my boss is here, the chancellor's represented, and I'll talk with you about the approach that we took from the video for the last 12 months.
What does it mean to be a more inclusive campus that prepares our students to participate, to lead in a more global society? The strategic plan for inclusive excellence is essentially a roadmap.
It focuses on UC San Diego as a system, helping us to achieve our academic mission of excellence.
The whole framework is 8 words: student-centered, research-focused, service-oriented, public university.
We're asking everyone to rethink and to reimagine a new way of being and really encouraging a cultural shift on campus.
If everybody tries to be truthful to themselves, we'll end up being a great community.
Inclusion, I think, is an opportunity for UCSD, who's still very young in a university space, to own who we want to be as a university.
This is about you. This is about us. This is about us growing together and creating something new together.
It's really about, like, I think, being there for each other. Being comfortable here in our identities, that's crucial to our ability to work. So if we're compromised, the university isn't actually getting the best work.
It affects me, but then it can go on and on. It'll affect UC San Diego as a whole. It'll affect the region as a whole. We're doing really cool work.
It's a very important thing for us to be able to hear all kinds of different voices from all kinds of different perspectives, because that's how we're going to be able to understand everything that.
What's important to me is that our current students, faculty, and staff feel like they are included, they feel welcome, they feel like this is a place where they can thrive.
Really, academic excellence rests on inclusive excellence.
If we, as graduate students, are voicing our opinions in a strategic plan, we can bring that to every other academic institution that we can possibly go to. And that's what makes being here at UC San Diego so important. We can basically branch into the future.
Our common ancestor was about 2,000 generations ago, so we're all cousins, at the most 2,000 miles removed, and they're part of the same family.
The idea of one person making change is real, and we can make that happen.
And taking that first step and putting voice out there really is the hurdle, and really is the first step in how one person can affect change.
Once you speak out, and a lot of people will change their mind about things that previously they thought was like different.
And I think that we have the opportunity to make that sort of a three-dimensional, more holistic experience by acknowledging the diverse backgrounds that students come from, including our own.
It's not always what it is, but it's being heard, and how we listen and how we get to future view validates people's excitement to be here and engagement. Right? I'm more engaged when I feel that you value what I have to bring to the table.
In any complex community, especially like an academic community, the community knows the problems and the community knows the solutions. It's no individual that knows every problem and every solution. So that's why if we are inclusive and listening to each other, we can identify the problems and we can identify the solutions.
We are going to have many opportunities for participation. I want them to see themselves in this plan.
We also ask people to be involved in the Idea Wave campaign. Any member of our campus community can log in there and share your ideas. So there's online, there's face-to-face. We'll also have focus groups to talk with each other, to talk with us, to inform the plan and to help us shape the future of our campus.
So if you want to have change change happen, you have to be the change, you have to be that first example.
Think of like how we can get everyone else in their one powerful voices to be a part of this. That's the power of diversity.
The shape our campus takes as we move into the future depends on your voice today.
Each individual piece is critical to building our campus puzzle.
Transformation requires our collective genius. Imagine what we can build together.
Help shape the future of UC San Diego at
diversity.ucsd.edu.
Thanks for everyone watching that. It took us several months with our great PR firm to work on this about a year ago. And what you're hearing us talk about there is how we're going to build out a strategic plan for the university. So when you are coming up at night, reading your good books, go to plan.ucsd.edu and you'll see the executive summary, and then you'll see the whole plan, which includes interdisciplinary research and facilities expansion and resource and sustainability efforts. All the building you see going on around here has stemmed from, I think it's goal number 5 in the strategic plan for the university. Another goal is improving student experience, the teaching and learning experience. So the teaching and learning commons came out of that plan, and some other new initiatives for students, faculty, and staff. Goal number 2 of that strategic plan for the university is, I'm not quoting exactly here, but the language is creating a diverse and inclusive university where learning is accessible for all. So goal number 2, which is diversity and inclusion, then came from that in 2012-13, came our division, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then came the positions, my boss is the Vice Chancellor who's seen there, who reports to the Chancellor and I report to her. And so we have these great ideas. We want to create a diverse and inclusive university. How do we do that? So I have been tasked on behalf of the Vice Chancellor and Chancellor to shepherd that plan, and it's called a Strategic Plan for Inclusive Excellence. And so we asked among ourselves, what do we need to do to reach as vast a campus as ours? One of the things we learned, and I think we heard in our previous presenter, we didn't want it to be top down. So even the strategic plan, if you've been affiliated with the institution for more than 5 years, you may have gone to town halls as I did. I've been here almost 8 years. And there were hundreds of us who went to at least somewhere between 5 to 10 town halls of 100+ people like this, talking about what does an inclusive institution look like. I think McKinsey was the consultant firm that worked with us. So from that, a year plan, they came up with these 5 goals, and goal number 2 is the goal that we're working on here. So our question was, and there's a lot of literature about this, and we could write this plan on our own, but we thought, well, let's start with people who have a vested interest in this. People who are student leaders, people who are directors of centers, people who have submitted comments to our office at diversity@ucsd.edu. We kind of went to those people, just looked them up, and sent a blast out saying, if you're interested, we want you to be a part of a group that we've called Advocates and Influencers. And so this is somewhat of a community engagement or a community organizing model where we get people on the ground, community leaders, academic leaders, staff, faculty, student leaders, and interested persons to come and talk with us. That group on paper, or at least online, is about 350 people. So what I did when I started this job almost 2 years ago was to find out who they were, to meet them at several forums throughout the whole year. So I've met with that group at least 7 times in the last 12 months. And it's forums like this where we have lunch, where I might ask a key question and then have them talk amongst themselves and leave the stickies, leave the papers. And one of the first questions that we asked was, what does inclusive excellence mean to you? And so there were questions about hiring, there were questions about internship, there were questions about study abroad, there were questions about more funding for underrepresented students to do certain things. There were questions and suggestions about cluster faculty hiring in ethnic studies, or diversifying women in physics, those kinds of suggestions. So overall, what we did then was to think about a campus-wide engagement strategy. And that was a lot of face-to-face meeting with all this group as a whole, but also going wherever we were invited. Like I was invited to this room actually to speak to some alums and some corporate sponsors, and I came here, spoke to them I think twice. I've also spoken to the trustee board, I think, or the foundation board, and then student, faculty, and staff groups. All told, I think we reached somewhere close to 10,000 people, and a lot of that work was me with my team on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, and some of this was also online. We also have been working on a state of diversity report, so to speak, at UC San Diego. So if you are on campus, within the next month or so, you should hear more from us about it. So people wanted to know, well, where are we? What's the starting point? And what are our areas for opportunity? And so that's something that we've been working on and we've been developing that general plan. So we engaged with graduate students, and anything you see here for graduate students we did for all groups. We had forums, we had dinners, focus groups, we had focus groups. I think we engaged about 350 to 400 people. You heard on the video there us talk about an Idea Wave campaign. If you're new to our campus, it's somewhat of an online social media platform. And that was developed also out of the strategic plan where people were saying, we don't have an online space to talk with community members about things like parking. So we had an Idea Wave on parking. We had an Idea Wave on labs and some other things. And so in this campaign, what we learned was people wanted more residency training to diversify the School of Medicine residents, for example. We also learned that people wanted more flexible work arrangements, particularly for parents and those with senior care issues. We learned that students wanted LGBT studies and disability studies as part of the curriculum. So we kind of went through all of those things and said, okay, this is related to Scripps Institution of Oceanography. This is related to academic affairs. This is related to student affairs or to human resources. So that campaign involved over 500 people, and it's where they could put the ideas people can like, support, comment on, and then we could take that to their vice chancellor to share those ideas. So the point I'm making here is through individual, large group, through leadership groups and online spaces, we were able to reach a few tens of thousands of people. And still, we haven't reached them all because, I mean, UC San Diego is so big, but these are some of the efforts that we were a part of. We had individual meetings with TAs, faculty and staff, and student leadership. What's available for all those of you who are data geeks and love this kind of work? We have a platform on our website. It's called an accountability dashboard. So if you go to diversity.ucsd.edu and click on accountability, say you want to know about graduate students or you want to know about faculty. You see it here, faculty diversity dashboard, undergraduate diversity dashboard, staff, graduate, etc. You can get some general information about gender, race, ethnicity, and I think first generation and national origin and sexual orientation and so forth. You can get some of that data on some of the dashboards. We hired a research analyst to help us with that, again, so that we don't just go with a story. Well, we have too many women in this area, or there are not enough of that. Well, let's see what the data tells us, right? And so we go to this dashboard as a guideline so that each VC area can set their goals based on what we found. So this is helping us. Everything that we are doing is informed by our data. And so this comes from the Office of Institutional Research. And Health Sciences also has data about faculty and climate information. And so people can get their diversity snapshot, in other words, of what they might need. Some of our achievements as we've gone through these last few years is that we have increased our new graduate student population in the URM population, this Black, Native, and Hispanic populations, by about 43%. And we've more than doubled our scholarships and our awards since 2012 for graduate and some for undergraduate education. And this is just stomping the pavement, talking to donors and funders, putting the reports forward in our diversity report to say, here's what we've been doing. We didn't have a formal report as we're having this year, so we just need a 1 or 2 pager and awarding more grants. So the work that we've done this past year brought us here. What will be our 3 areas of focus? So after talking to all these folks, we're still talking to people. This is just really after a year what we have found. The 3 main areas that the campus will focus on, or at least what we heard from our constituents and student, faculty, staff, and students who participated, is that we would work on improving access and success, climate, and the university, and also accountability. Because what we heard, particularly from those who are longtime employees or students who've been here a long time, is diversity, diversity, diversity. We hear this all the time. We hear it in corporate. We hear it sometimes in class, depending on your field, like ethnic studies, cultural studies, education studies, and so forth. You might hear these terms more than other fields. People were saying, well, how do we know it's going to make a difference? How do we know this time it's going to be new? What's new about this? And so the accountability piece is what is new, and I'll talk through what will happen in that process. So what do we mean by each one? Access and success means a commitment to attract, recruit, and retain more diverse faculty, staff, and students. And the goal here is not just diversify, but to increase talent and to really respond to questions around making our campus more excellent. Climate is working to make sure people feel valued, supported, like they belong,
at UC San Diego. So we can populate the physics, spaces, or we can populate the School of Medicine or Cultural Studies or the staff of the Price Center or in Human Resources with more women, or younger people, more first generation people, or people in the LGBTQIA+ community. But they may not feel included, they may not be invited and or supported for promotion or advancement in the institution. So you may bring them all, but only advance or promote certain groups. And so this is data we're also tracking. So climate is improving that sense of belonging and that sense of value, and we know this through the Staff at Work survey. There is a Higher Education Research Institute, Harry Institute at UCLA. We have worked with them to design a faculty experience survey. There's also the UQ survey, which is the University of California Undergraduate Experience Survey, and there are at least 10 instruments that we've used in addition to the qualitative work we've been talking to the tens of thousands of people online and in person. And so we can measure how we are doing in that area, as well as other areas, how we're doing hiring, like you saw in the dashboards. And so that's where the accountability comes in, and that's the anchor for our plan. And it's ensuring institutional accountability through those processes and those structures. The surveys, working with IR, institutional research, going back again next year and coming up in January, doing another round of focus groups to understand, well, what does it mean that those with disabilities, Asian and Black respondents, don't feel as comfortable on campus or in specific departments. So let's find out what's happening in those departments. Let's have focus groups of, up to 70 people, so 12 groups of 12, maybe up to 10 times that we'll meet with them. The accountability piece is materialized through all the things that we've designed to include as many people. And now having the VC areas, the Vice Chancellor areas, report to the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisory Council that I sit on and that my boss, the Vice Chancellor, co-chairs. And so they will have to then provide a report on the state of EDI in their unit. So with all the instruments that I just talked about there, we're within the next month, we'll be having accountability prep meetings with them. And so by spring 2019, they'll be answering questions about recruitment, retention, climate, and equity. So how are you doing in these areas? And have you tried certain kinds of things? Have you partnered with certain community organizations? Did you get a new grant? Are you developing a K-12 engineering program for girls in Southeast or Chula Vista? Are there certain kinds of things that you are doing that might be changing climate and access and success? And then we compare to our peers and aspirant peers. So in some fields, we'll be looking at MIT, we'll be looking at Harvard and Rutgers, for example, in some fields. In others, we'll be looking at UCLA or UCSF or something like that. We're thinking about med schools and others. And so we ask them, well, how are you doing with these other institutions? How are we looking there? And we have lots of things that we look at, such as called the Equity Index, where we look at the number of women or the number of Native Americans in the state, and then the number on our campus. And then we look at the number of persons between 18 to 24, which are the traditional ages for undergraduates, and we look at how do we measure up, if you will, against who is in the state, since we are a state institution. And as a federal institution receiving funding, we do have to report those numbers. And then describe future strategies. So if you're doing really well, great. Is there anything else you might want to change? Or if that program didn't work so well, how can we help you as a division get there? And everything we're doing is cyclical and iterative. So we don't see this as static at all. It is dynamic. We're asking you different questions. And what we've done has been a whole 12 plus months of getting here. I'll back up just a bit before I close here. The strategic plan is also made up of, when you email these offices and you're like, does anybody ever answer? We counted a number of demands that mostly students made, and we came up with over 350. And that's where we got the themes to then develop these 3 core tenets. So then that's when we went, like, well, let's see what the surveys say. Let's have the focus group. So please do know that if you ever emailed our office or chancellor@ucsd.edu and it was a diversity-related concern, there are so many that did become hard with very little staff. I mean, there was only one person in the chancellor's office 5 years ago, and now we have a much bigger team. And so my position is even new within the last 2 years. So we said, well, let's find out what that is. So I have a qualitative background as well, and our data analysts, we looked at those 300 comments, things like, well, this is related to climate, or this is related to student learning, or something like that. And from there, that helped us to design how we were going to then approach the campus to talk both online and in person. So the plan should be launched formally this fall, since we've been interacting with folks for a year, and we'll do it all over again. We will see where we are every 9 to 12 months through the accountability reporting meetings with the vice chancellors, and will administer the staff at work survey, just got administered, it should close very soon. And there's a customer satisfaction survey that if you're at UC San Diego, you should have also received. It doesn't come from our office, but we do work with them to collate the data and make sense of it. So yeah, so we're hoping, that year after year after year, we'll see more awards being given, greater equity, greater access, and better climate, and more excellent institution. And so what we've been sharing is, my boss, when I actually interviewed, she ended her talk with me saying, well, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so every day we just try to do something that's a little bit different. So, you're supposed to write those thank you for interviewing me, and I really look forward to being here. So I write my thing. You asked Wade. Wade was my former student, so I was like, I think I can ace this letter. She's like, nothing. She's like, I know, I have a saying that is a corollary to that. So listening to Dr. Ian Smith, who's a physician in Washington, D.C., he often talks about nutrition and fitness, and he says if one thing changes, everything changes. So if you walk an extra mile, if you stop eating carbs, like some of us just probably did that, broke that rule, but whatever. And so I wrote back to her, thanking her for the interview, and saying, I really took to heart what she said, well, if nothing changes, nothing changes. When we think about learned systems, I'd like to offer this. And if we think about writing for a grant or welcoming that new student in that dorm or apartment or whatever, that one thing can change that dynamic in the whole system. So I leave you with that, and that's part of what we've been selling to the campus. Thank you.
I'm excited to use this kind of microphone. I've never had it right here. Little things make me happy, like clickers also. All right, awesome. So we've had a really incredible discussion so far. I've learned some new things, so I'm excited. I hope that I can offer some new or at least interesting things as well. So again, my name is Carrie Sawyer. I'm a manager of inclusion and diversity at Qualcomm, and today we're going to be talking about designing inclusion. So I wanted to just first offer, why do we even care about this? I mean, there's so many reasons, but you'd be surprised in corporate America how often that comes up, right? Like, what's the ROI? Why does this matter? And for Qualcomm, innovation is really the key to our business, inventing the technology of the future. And it's not only important that we have voices around the table because we should, it's because if we're going to invent that technology, we need to have everyone represented in that process. Because what is the world going to look like in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And how will that be different if certain key people, certain critical ideas aren't included in that discussion? And so that's really one thing that drives our team when we think about why diversity and inclusion matters to Qualcomm and why diversity and inclusion matters to really the future of the world, especially the future of technology, because I'm sure everyone has heard the machines are coming and everything is going to be automated, and it'll be a scary transition, but it'll end up being amazing. And so that's really something that our company is helping to design, and that's why we need all these voices. So this is our vision statement for our Global Inclusion and Diversity team. So Qualcomm is dedicated to sustaining an environment where all employees feel welcome, inventive, and inspired through initiatives and programs that foster opportunity, professional growth, and community. That's actually the first time that I got to say that out loud for a group, so let me know if there's anything confusing or if there's grammatical errors in this. But we really worked hard to figure out, okay, what is our idealistic vision? What is that stretch goal? What does that blue sky look like? And we feel like this vision statement really helps to encompass all of those things. So what happens when design meets diversity? So I didn't talk about in my introduction. My background is actually in what's called human-computer interaction. So, how we make technology easier to use. I spent almost 15 years being in UX and a user experience researcher, and then I took a hard right or left turn into diversity and inclusion. And that bridge for me was actually design thinking. I discovered that I had a passion for uplifting people, for empowering women and people of color, but then I also really love user experience. And when I tell my story, I talk about how these kind of two passions combined. And I actually don't even think of my passion for UX or human-centered design as a passion. I liken it to being right-handed. You're not passionate about being right-handed, you just are right-handed. And so this is the lens that I approach everything. And so as I was working at Qualcomm, on our women's network, on our African American network, I'm like, how can I use what I know about human-centered design to actually solve some of our diversity and inclusion challenges at the company. And that resulted in a design thinking proposal and a big project, and I was able to make a career shift, taking everything that I know and learn and am on the human-centered design side and taking that into our diversity and inclusion team, which is both exciting and challenging because diversity and inclusion lives in HR, right? And HR does things a certain way. They've been doing those things in those ways for a really long time, which is exciting because I love innovating. I love coming up with new ways to do things, but then also challenging because I just want to do them. And I don't always want to go through the steps necessary to convince other people that they should do them too. So those are things that happen when design and diversity meet. So I wanted to talk a bit about what shifts occur when you bring these two spaces together. And the first thing is really shifting the questions that we're asking in diversity and inclusion. And we're shifting both what we're asking and how we're asking it. And so this is kind of our big question. How can we use human-centered design to build a diversity and inclusion strategy for Qualcomm? And so I've kind of called out like what we're asking. Like we weren't really thinking about like HCI or user-centered design as a tool that we could use in this space before, so that's totally different. The second thing is how we're asking it. So I love framing questions in this way, especially in a space where things tend to be defined and done in a certain way. We've got this like, how can we? Now, what I learned from one of my colleagues is that when you ask someone, how can we, it actually opens up the brain. When I say, we need to use HCI to build diversity and inclusion strategies at Qualcomm, people will automatically be like, no, we don't. How is that possible? I don't know what you're talking about. But when I say, how can we, it's like a question. It is a question. And it opens the brain in that way to make people start problem solving and considering how this thing is possible. And so I tend to use this how can we over and over in our discussions because it helps people to see what could be possible instead of getting stuck in how it's been done in the past. So the second thing that we're shifting is our perspective. So how can we tackle diversity and inclusion holistically? And you know, when you're thinking about your strategy, we've got like the representation side. We typically think about that. That's all the hiring. And in my opinion, that's actually the easier part because you can take a look at any role. There's government reports that tell you, for an engineer in San Diego, here's how many people could be in this role at your company. And then you can compare that to the actual number that you have and see what the gap is. So that's just like math and changing some processes. Now, in actuality, it's much more complicated than that because of the politics involved, but it's much more straightforward. On the inclusion side, well, that's like I started to talk about earlier, is really how you feel when you show up to work. And so that's why I've shown this like employee life cycle that we've got here. And so we're really shifting that perspective around inclusion to think about the entire life cycle. From the time that you start interacting with our company to the time that you potentially transition out or move into a different role. And if you think about diversity and inclusion, actually in each of these boxes, there's a different place. So I'm going to give a specific example. So let's take a use case, let's take a persona. Let's take a new grad female African American. So how you attract her, how you actually put her through the interview process, what that looks like, what barriers there might be, how you onboard her, how you help her to thrive day to day, how you develop her, and how you get her promoted might be very different than how you approach that for an Asian middle-aged male or an LGBTQ like intern. There's lots of differences and nuances in someone's experience, and so we're really trying to tackle that experience in this granular way. Now, when you think about the way that I just put it, that's like a billion different combinations, right? How do you actually do that? Well, you do that through looking for the patterns and the trends because one of my hypotheses is that people have a very similar experience, but then depending upon the different identities that you have, it's going to cause it to kind of tweak one way or another. And so how do you both find that through line so that if I fix something for the African American woman that the white woman is also experiencing, but then if I fix it for both of them, or if it's the same thing, I can fix it for everyone. But if the LGBTQ person has a special acute need, then we're going to create a special program, look at processes, talk to managers in a different way. So you've got this kind of like micro, macro, you've got this, all right, here's the trend, then here, I don't like to say outliers, but here are the different unique experiences that we need to develop solutions for. And so looking at the employee experience life cycle like that, when you think about diversity and inclusion, really helps you to be intentional and to understand what it actually looks like for the different groups at your company and find those trends, but then also find those acute areas of needs that you need to design programs for. That was super fast, and I know this particular chart, there's a lot in it, so thanks for bearing with me. For people who don't look at the employee life cycle, which I hadn't for a long time, I actually changed these words to make it easier for people to understand, like, what are you talking about? Like, retention, progression, like, what are those? This is the user-friendly version of HR speak, so. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about shifting our approach and really show some examples of different design thinking exercises that we've gone through as we're looking at our strategy for diversity and inclusion at Qualcomm. We're going to talk about 3 really quickly. Inclusive investigations, our women's network unification, and then our employee listening sessions. So for the inclusive investigations, this was something that really came out of me wanting to understand what does inclusion actually mean at Qualcomm. And so when we were talking with, when Diane was talking, one of the very first things they did was understand what does this space even mean to people. We want to do that too because we don't actually have a shared definition. And if I'm trying to improve inclusion and it means something completely different to you than me, how do we know if we actually made a difference? And so in this, what we wanted to do was go around and understand what inclusion meant for our main diversity groups. So because we take federal money and we have all that kind of government stuff going on, and we have to measure like Black people and women and veterans, ability, and several different ones. But what I want to understand again is like, what are those common things that people have, and then what are the things that are different? And so this actually manifested in a series of different kinds of interviews with people and workshops. And we started out with a pilot, first with women, and then second with millennials. Now, we want to go ahead and cycle through all of the different kinds of groups at Qualcomm, including our male groups and our majority groups as well, because again, we're looking for those trends and those things that are different. And so really what we were able to discover in those first 2 pilots were those different hotspots is what I'm calling them, those trends we want to be able to create programs for. So we find out what's happening with people, we identify the trends, we map a program to that particular hotspot, and then we're able to measure to see, all right, how are things changing based on this program that we created? Do we need a new program? Do we need to tweak something? Is it going great? So really the next steps on this is to continue to study all of the different diversity groups and then prioritize those top themes and think about what are the programs that we need to create to help. So the second thing that I wanted to share was around our women's network unification. So at Qualcomm, last year we had 2 different women's organizations, one that was focused on IT and one that was focused on the entire company. And so our chief technology officer and our chief diversity officer wanted those 2 to be one, to share resources, to share a name. And so how can design thinking help in that space? Well, we actually took a very similar approach and we added a few things. So we wanted to go through and see what are the differences and similarities between these 2 groups. So we did a program inventory, we did some more interviews and some more workshops to really understand what are the needs of women at our company, and then how can we take this opportunity while we're combining these 2 organizations to also figure out what additional programs we might need to better support them. And so just this summer, QWomen was launched. We were able to meet the goals of creating that shared mission, having that shared budget, and now we're really looking at how can we measure impact. I actually met with the new board today to kind of get a status on how things were going with them, and they asked about, all right, we want everyone at Qualcomm by the end of next year to know who we are and what we do. Okay, so that's another great opportunity for us to use design to figure out how we actually reach all those people. What channels should we use? How are people consuming information, and how do we get that message out to those different people? Last but not least, so our employee listening sessions. Now this particular exercise was again about understanding how people are. And if anyone's seen the news recently or in the last year or so, Qualcomm's gone through a series of layoffs. And that can be very, very jarring to people at the company, whether you're laid off or not. And so as we're having conversations on my team, with our, our different network leads, with just friends and people who work at the company, we really started to get this, just this underlying unrest and frustration. And so what we wanted to do was figure out, okay, how can the company better support people during times of change and transition? And what did we do? Well, we started talking with people. Now this listening session, actually Eric, I'm gonna give him a shout out. We had a really great brainstorming session as I was putting this format together. But it was really unique in that it wasn't just a regular focus group. We invited a group of, say, 20 or so employees from different parts of the company to come and sit and talk about that exact question that I shared. So how can the company better support people through times of change? Now, we also invited leaders to come and sit in on this conversation, but the rule for the leaders was that they weren't actually allowed to talk. They were just there to hold space, to listen, and to learn. And then after, of course, we had a debrief with just the leaders because it's really hard to hear kind of what's going wrong and not react. And actually, another shout out, my friend Andrea in the back, she likened it to a couples therapy when you have that moment where you can't talk and your partner can. Like, what do you do with all that? So she's like, you absolutely have to have an outlet for the leaders. And so the leaders came and the people came and they just talked. And we had millennials, we had engineers, we had everyone. And there was a lot of frustration and anger and hope and all of these different things. But I wanted to give people this space because people need to be heard. Leaders need to hear what's going on. HR needs to have this information so that we can actually act on it and then create programs and give messaging and find out, okay, what are the hot spots in this area that we can actually do something about? Like, going through layoffs sucks no matter what side you're on, but the company can do more to support people, just to let them know that, that we notice, we acknowledge it, we care, and we want to help people to get to the other side, back where there's hope and commitment and understanding, again, as we kind of invent the new normal. And so that was actually, it was difficult, but it was super fun, and I was really excited to create this space and then bring in the leaders and not let them talk because they talk all the time. And so it was really great to hear their reactions, and some people were totally open, and some people, open and acknowledging, oh, I heard them say this, that surprised me, or I've been hearing that forever. Other people were like, oh, don't they know how business works? Or, so you have all these different kinds of users within the leaders. But it's good for us to know that, right? Because we have to reach all of them when we're talking with them about what they can do to help their employees through the transition. So I'm super proud of that project, and I'm super happy that we're going to be able to create things to help people so that, when they come to work, because how do you come to work and show up as your true self and do your best work when all this is hanging over? So these are just little things that, that we get to do, but we can take that design lens and then kind of go through that same, all right, we've got our program now, how do we measure, how do we iterate, all of those things kind of follow on. And so because we're a big company, it takes a little while to get through the different phases, and we want to make sure that we do our due diligence, but we're definitely in the middle of that and really understanding how we can help. So I think that might be my last slide. So questions, and if we have a couple minutes, or we can jump right into the next part, but you probably let me all the first step.